Good morning, everyone. It's 9:30 and we should get started the second day of our expert meeting. So we welcome all of you here in the room and also all participants connected virtually. I hope you enjoyed your evening yesterday and you are full of good energy for today's discussion. We have today two fascinating sessions in the agenda, and we'll start with session on disaggregation and inclusive data. This session will be moderated by Mary Smith from Irish Central Statistics Office. So, Mary, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you. On data disaggregation and inclusive data. And firstly, I would just like to thank Tina and Sarah and Renata for inviting me to moderate at this session. So with that, we have 4 interesting presentations today. And the 4 speakers are from ISTAT, which is the Italian Statistics Office, CISSTAT, the Interstate Statistical Committee, UNICEF, and the 4th speaker is UN Resident Coordinator Office in Azerbaijan. So before I introduce the first speaker, just yesterday from the 3 sessions, Carolina had emphasized common threads within the sessions. So today you will see these common threads running through the sessions. And just to borrow a few phrases from yesterday, the devil is in the detail. So with data disaggregation, hopefully it allows us to expose some of these devils that are in our way to achieving the Agenda 2030. And the detail is essential to find where the problems are. So our speakers today will look at the data disaggregation and exposing issues of inequality. Another phrase from yesterday, red carpeting on the VNR. So again, data disaggregation allows us to lift the carpet and look at the problems which lie underneath and expose some of the challenges that we all face. And we're not just covering up all the problems. So again, the data disaggregation examples today will show us how to address the issues and problems which are causing problems in terms of achieving the SDG goals. Also yesterday, there was a lively discussion on the index and the summary tools for looking at how we are achieving progress. And again, the index showed that it was an important tool to summarize the data, but again, there was an emphasis on the detail needed to look at indicators which may be hidden behind an overall successful goal. So again, as we focus on this essential principle of leave no one behind, we see we can't do this or we can't look at vulnerable groups unless we have data disaggregation and inclusive data. So our speakers today will look at this theme and how we face the challenges and the successes in terms of data disaggregation. So with that, I will introduce our first speaker, Angela Ferruza from ISTAT, the Italian Statistics Office. And Angela is joining us today online from Rome. And Angela is head of the Division for Environment, Territory and Register of Geographic and Territorial Units that disseminate information on energy consumption of households, also urban environmental statistics, climate change statistics, and territorial data. Angela is also responsible for the project on sustainability that implemented ISTAT's SDG platform and also the SDG reports and publications for ISTAT. Angela is also a member of the UN Interagency Expert Group on SDGs, the Eurostat Working Group on Sustainable Development, and the UN ECE Steering Group in Climate Change-related Statistics. She also chairs the task force on the UNEC measuring hazardous events and disasters, and I see that there's a publication down there on hazardous events and disasters if anybody would like to take it after the meeting. So with that, Angela, we ask you to please introduce your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary, and thank you, UNEC, to have invited me and to present. So, the key, of course, considering sustainable development goals is to leave no one behind. And I have to, of course, after having worked for a long period now on this thematic, there are a lot of challenges, but also of opportunities. And I'll try to show you the SDGs Istat approach. Next slide, please. Okay. I think that we have to start considering that is very important for sustainability to consider economic, social, environmental, and institutional goals together. They have to be developed considering an integrated approach and from global to local. Therefore, it is important to consider integrated statistical measure at the disaggregated territorial level. And this work during this year, starting from 2016, has been developed together with our other institutions that, if you see the icon, that put their hands in the work. And the statistical measures are used in the National Sustainable Development Strategy, but are important because the National Sustainable Development Strategy has the necessity to be considered at regional. So we have in Italy considered sustainable regional strategy, and in some cases also urban strategy. And of course, the indicators are important for the ecological transition plan and the Italian National Recovery and Resilience Plan. But from my experiences, I worked during this year on also trying to help colleagues that from the ministry that work on national strategy for sustainable development, and that presented also the last voluntary national review in New York, and they ask for territorial disaggregation and for different kind of areas. Territorial disaggregation is exactly one of the key words that is important to choose the indicators, at least as far as national strategy in Italy is concerned. And this has been very important because in all this period, this kind of job inside the national statistical system, inside also the National Statistical Institute, is important because these statistical measures build a common language. And the territorial disaggregation is the basis to integrate the different domains and to try to build information for different territorial areas. What I mean is not only the request that we had from the national strategy is not only to have territorial statistical measures that have to be disposable at administrative territorial level, but the request in many cases is to have these kind of indicators at different territorial areas, and this is a big challenge. So we worked and we are going to work because we do not finish this kind of job using administrative data, and I'll show you something, and geostatistical information, and this help to build the territorial disaggregation of integrated statistical measures for sustainability. But it is a big challenge, not only for methodological reasons, but also for institutional reasons, because all this work is strictly connected with the confidentiality problems. Next slide, please. So during these years, from 2016, we produce every 6 months an update of the indicators, because we have a system and where these measures are disseminated. And we disseminate also every year statistical reports in Italian and in English. At the moment, the last disseminated statistical measures are 371 that consider 138 UNEG SDGs indicators. Next slides. And in these slides, there are some, the link to the system, because we have this system, and we have also the possibility to where we have these indicators, the statistics, and we have also the possibility to have interactive charts to consult them, and this has been very useful because, for example, the national sustainable strategy fixed, as I will show, some indicators, and everyone can consult and use and download these indicators for their work. Next slide. What I told you before is that integration and inclusion are keywords. And so we consider an integrated approach among well-being and sustainability. As most of you know, in ISTAT there was a big job done before SDGs, the beginning from 2011, that built a system of indicators related to well-being. And they are also fixed for law, and a selection of them is fixed for law. So when we began to work with SDGs system, it was very, very important to consider an approach that is integrated among well-being and sustainability. This means in concrete that some indicators and statistical measures are the same. And of course, the other very important keyword is disaggregation, to leave no one behind. So in this slide, you can see that we have a statistical measure, for example, disaggregated at regional level, more than 200, or at age level, and so on. Next slide, please. In the last report, we tried to work a lot on measuring inequalities and to work considering territorial imbalance and women and young people disadvantages, especially in Italy due to the difficulties in entering the labor market. So in the last report, it was done an analysis that tried to consider the key aspects that are in the Italian National Recovery and Resilience Plans. Equal opportunities between generation and gender and territory, and the promotion of equality. Therefore, ISTAT started to explore territorial and gender inequalities by a multidimensional approach for measuring the progress, with respect, of course, to the goals and the target of the agenda. Next slide. Therefore, we try to work considering in this case 152 measures that cover all the 17 goals and considering the best performance. It means the best outcome for one or more regions from 2010 to the present, considering the positive negative direction of the measures with respect to the targets. And almost two-thirds of the best performance are in the north and more than half over the last 5 years. And so the goals were classified according to the degree of homogeneity and heterogeneity among regions in reaching the best performance. And so you can see in the slides that there was an homogeneous trend, for example, in goal 3, 11, and 12. And instead there are higher differences between regions in goal 17, 10, 8, and so on. Next slide. And in the last report, a lot of attention was dedicated also to gender gaps. So 100 ISTAT SDGs measures broken down by gender and available in time series were classified in 6 areas according with the national and European strategy for gender equality. And so gender trends were considered to monitor the gaps and to highlight when indicators are improving from a female perspective. And in this kind of work, positive means that the evolution of statistical measures over time is to the greater benefit of women compared to men, and negative, of course, the opposite. And so we had an overall positive evolution of gender gap for 62 statistical measures. 11 measures are stable and 27 show a negative trend. Income and risk of poverty and empowerment and inclusion areas which record the largest improvement are considered. And gender differentials results a worsening in the area of health and competences. Next slide, please. This was a kind of analysis, the slides that we have seen, that could help. But I wanted to explain better what I told at the beginning related to the national sustainable development strategies. There was a group that was asked by the Ministry of Environment, and there was a work along this year to consider a methodological approach to select a subgroup of statistical measures chosen by the SDGs platform, and according to the criteria of parsimony, feasibility, timeliness, extension and frequency of time series, sensitivity to public policy, but most of all, territorial dimension. So in 2018, a subset of 43 indicators were chosen for monitoring the national strategy of indicators. This set of indicators were updated for different reasons. The first one was that the ISTAT platform was enriched. The other one, that we had a development of the National Sustainable Development Strategy in 2022 that was presented along in occasion of the VNR in July. The very important element, as I told you before, that during all the meetings, they asked for territorial disaggregation, because this kind of work was done considering the stakeholders, and most of the stakeholders are the people that are working on regional strategy and in some cases urban strategy. Next slide, please. So we have a new version of the strategy and a new version of subset of indicators, 55 core indicators, for which the territorial dimension is essential. This means that in some cases, if we have to choose among different indicators, of course, the indicators that have territorial dimension and time series in territorial dimension were chosen more frequently. And as I told you before, this is important, but it is not enough, because in some cases the territorial analysis that asked is has to consider not only administrative territorial level, but also something different. And for this reason, it is very important the kind of job that in ISTAT we are doing, trying to work on administrative records. Next slide, please. In fact, because the basis of all the philosophy is that territorial disaggregation is necessary to integrate economic, social, environmental, and institutional domain, we try to work to move from administrative data to statistical data. This is a big challenge for sustainability because, you know, all of us work on administrative data, but all you know that is not so immediate that from administrative data we have statistical data. And so there has been a long job that it began in 2017. That is the building of the statistical register of place. It is a complex system with several components. We have administrative territorial units and functional areas. This means, for example, 7,904 municipalities and also functional areas. We have enumeration areas and microzones. We have 730,000 georeferenced enumeration areas and more than 1 million of microzones that are related to infrastructures, green areas, and so on for all the municipality. And they have been produced by many different archives of geographic data. And we have in this register addresses and geographic coordinates. This piece of the register is built considering administrative archives of data from municipalities, from cadastral agency, for economic archives, and this gives us the possibility to have unique identification code of addresses and geographic coordination. And then we have the building and dwellings that are built considering data from cadastral agency and other data. And the buildings are georeferred. The final integrated product will allow the possibility of georeferenced information for flexible output. And this is very important, and one of the first results is the preliminary 1 kilometer population grid. But the importance of all this job is that we will be in the condition in the next future to use this kind of register to have to work considering census data, therefore population data, in the different places. And so this register could be useful to have some, not a lot, but some SDGs indicators at very detailed territorial level. Next slide.
Sorry, Angela.
Could
I just ask you to conclude?
Yeah, I will show you only
of time, and we'll have time for discussion in the questions and answers. Thank you.
Only the picture. So in this picture, you can see the register and the work that we did, and climate change and sustainability statistics can be improved. And the next slides Next slide. Okay, you can see what I told you before related to the grids. The last, only to tell the last slide, next slide, please, only to tell what I try to global to local and geostatistical analysis are a factor of integration. Thank you so much and sorry for being late.
Thank you very much, Angela, for a very detailed and informative presentation on the Italian experience. So at this stage, we will go directly to our next speaker, and then at the end of the second presentation, we will have questions and answers session for both Angela and Elena. So with that, I will introduce the next speaker, Elena Vosmerko, and Elena is with Interstate Statistical Committee, CISSTAT. Elena is a consultant in the Department of Socio-Demographic Statistics in CISSTAT. Elena has a PhD in economics. Her sphere of professional interests are environmental statistics and monitoring of SDG indicators. And Elena represents CISSTAT in the steering group on statistics for SDGs. And she has prepared this presentation with her colleague, Alexander Kiryanov, who is a specialist expert in CISSTAT. And Alexander also works in the Department of Socio-Demographic Statistics. And Alexander's sphere of professional interests include poverty and inequality statistics. He represents CISSTAT in the Task Force on Subjective Poverty Measures and Steering Group on Poverty and Inequality. So, Elena, we would like to ask you to introduce your presentation. Thank you very much.
Я хотела бы рассказать о деятельности Межгосударственного статкомитета СНГ по мониторингу показателей ЦУР и поделиться теми достижениями в этой области и рассказать о тех проблемах, с которыми мы сталкиваемся в процессе мониторинга показателей ЦУР. Свою деятельность по мониторингу ЦУР мы начали с 2016 года и начали ее с проведения обследования мнения национальных статистических служб о перечне глобальных показателей ЦУР. Я думаю, что многие межстрановые объединения начинали свою работу с этого этапа, с тем, чтобы понять, какие показатели уже есть по ЦУР в странах, какие приоритеты страны выбирают при организации мониторинга ЦУР, какие видят проблемы при сборе и обработке данных по показателям ЦУР. На основе этого обследования мы, и исходя из перечня глобальных показателей ЦУР, мы сформировали перечень показателей ЦУР для региона СНГ. Он состоял из 111 показателей. Мы исходили из принципа наиболее актуальных показателей для стран нашего региона. Второе обследование по ЦУР мы провели в 2019 году, и здесь мы уже обследовали мнения стран и изучали их опыт по организации и развитию мониторинга ЦУР. Был создан специальная платформа на сайте нашей организации «Статистика для ЦУР региона СНГ», на которой были размещены перечень показателей, вот этот 111, наши публикации и ссылки на международные организации, на их разделы, которые посвящены показателям ЦУР. За этот период была подготовлена серия публикаций, посвященных вопросам ЦУР. На регулярной основе у нас выходит сборник, и есть ряд специализированных публикаций. В 2022 году с учетом мнения наших национальных статистических служб был обновлен перечень показателей ЦУР для региона СНГ, и в настоящее время в него входит 148 уникальных показателей из перечня глобальных показателей ЦУР. На этом слайде вы видите публикации нашей организации, которые посвящены показателям ЦУР. Это сборник, который выходит на регулярной основе, и было несколько специализированных публикаций. Это население стран Содружества независимых государств и цели устойчивого развития, молодежь в Содружестве независимых государств. И это были статистические такие сборники, публикации, где были размещены ряд таблиц по показателям ЦУР. И был еще подготовлен обзор, он, к сожалению, только на русском языке есть. Это МКНР и ЦУР, сравнительный анализ и доступность информации по отдельным показателям в государствах-участниках СНГ. Вот на следующем слайде вы видите сравнительную таблицу, которая показывает, как изменялось наполнение нашего статистического сборника по показателям ЦУР. Первая публикация была в 2017 году. Мы ее подготовили, исходя уже из имеющихся у нас статистических показателей, не делая специальный запрос в страны, и он содержал на тот момент 19 показателей, которые соответствовали глобальным показателям ЦУР, и 25 – это близкие к ним или дополнительные показатели, если по этим целям у нас не было данных по глобальным показателям ЦУР, но с тем, чтобы отразить какие-то моменты, мы использовали близкие к ним тематические показатели. В последнем сборнике у нас уже был 91 глобальный показатель ЦУР и 16 дополнительных или близких к ним. И если первоначально мы в публикации исходили, чтобы у нас был максимальный охват стран, то уже в последнем сборнике мы использовали показатели, которые, может быть, есть только в 2-3 странах, или это данные, связанные не с регулярной отчетностью, а с какими-то обследованиями, которые в странах проводились. И при подготовке статистических публикаций мы сталкивались с такой проблемой, с которой, наверное, сталкиваются различные международные и межстрановые организации, когда в каких-то странах есть одни данные, в других странах есть другие, и мы выбираем как бы наиболее максимальное наполнение этих таблиц с показателями, с тем, чтобы можно было провести какой-то сравнительный анализ. Поскольку там, где связаны данные с обследованиями, то это и могут быть разные года и разные страны, и в этом случае мы уже пошли, уже в последних наших сборниках, мы делаем какие-то блоки с тем, чтобы все-таки показатели были представлены. Поскольку уже прошло несколько лет с момента, как мы ведем мониторинг за показателями ЦУР, у нас уже накоплена какая-то определенная база, и в настоящее время у нас готовится к размещению на сайте в Excel формате динамики данные по показателям ЦУР. На этом слайде видно, как вот размещено, ну, просто выбрана одна из целей. Когда будет это размещено на сайте в нашем специальном разделе, можно будет нажать на цель, высвечены показатели, которые у нас имеются по этим данным, и они сразу идут на 2 языках, на русском и английском, поэтому пользователи могут их использовать. И вот мы выбираем, например, какой-то показатель, и вот выглядит так двуязычная динамическая таблица. С какими проблемами мы столкнулись при подготовке публикаций и сбора данных в динамике? Я думаю, вот то, о чем я говорила, с чем сталкиваются любые межстрановые и международные объединения. Что национальные публикации по целям устойчивого развития, они, наверное, более глубокие, широкие, и перечень показателей охвачен, используется много различных национальных показателей, которые характеризуют решение тех или иных задач и достижение той или иной цели устойчивого развития. Но поскольку мы являемся межгосударственным объединением, и многие показатели мы выбираем, те, которые есть на пересечении, с тем, чтобы у нас была публикация максимально наполненной, а не было пустых строчек, или чтобы все показатели не сводились только отдельными блоками по той или иной стране. И мы все-таки стараемся, чтобы можно было провести и межстрановые какие-то сопоставления. Проведя вот эти наши два обследования по развитию мониторинга в странах Содружества, мы столкнулись с тем, что в национальных статистических службах имеются данные по показателям ЦУР, но, например, не по всем уровням дезагрегации. Что национальные статистические службы используют разные уровни дезагрегации, и трудно проводить какой-то сравнительный анализ. Для получения данных по новым показателям и новым уровням дезагрегации национальным статистическим службам нужно проводить новые пилотные обследования или внедрять новые модули уже в существующие обследования. Что, ну, с тем еще одна проблема, с которой сталкиваются все, это недостаточность ресурсов финансовых, человеческих, технических для сбора и обработки данных по целям устойчивого развития. Ну, еще одна такая проблема, как раз связанная с дезагрегацией, с тем, что очень трудно бывает получить данные, например, по наиболее уязвимым и малочисленным группам населения, например, люди с инвалидностью, мигранты, малочисленные народы. То есть, чтобы они попали в выборку, найти их, чтобы получить обследование и данные, это возникают большие и технические, и финансовые, и организационные трудности. Но я думаю, что это характерно не только для межстрановых и межгосударственных объединений. Я думаю, что и на уровне отдельных стран при проведении различных обследований статистические организации сталкиваются с этой проблемой. Теперь вот несколько слайдов из нашей публикации, из нашего сборника «Мониторинг показателей ЦУР», где вот я привожу как раз пример, насколько могут быть разные таблицы, и что очень трудно провести и дезагрегацию, и сравнительный анализ. Это вот, например, доля целевой группы населения, охваченной иммунизацией, включенной в национальные программы. Мы пошли тогда по другому пути, то есть мы делаем в этом случае такие модули, в которых отражаем данные по отдельным странам. Ну, вот еще один такой же пример. Это доля времени, затрачиваемой на неоплачиваемый труд по уходу в разбивке по полу, возрасту и месту проживания. Если мы видим, у кого-то из каких-то стран очень много различных уровней дезагрегации, у кого-то один. То есть в данном случае мы просто делаем картинку и рассматриваем развитие мониторинга и ход достижения той или иной цели устойчивого развития в динамике по стране, уже не проводя такой межстрановой анализ. Вот еще одна такая, где уже более можно сопоставить, это число абонентов фиксированного широкополосного доступа к сети интернет. Все, спасибо. Если у кого-то есть вопросы, наверное, в конце сессии тогда ответить.
Yes, thank you very much, everyone. And just before we open the floor, before I open the questions to the floor, I would just like to ask Elena and Angela if they would like to elaborate in terms of their platform in the ongoing work in continuing to work with their partners on the platform and displaying disaggregated data. I know the territorial issue is important for Italy and Elena with displaying information on countries. So I would just be interested to know if you worked with a mapping institute in developing your platform and also in terms of communicating the ongoing disaggregated work. And Elena, if you would like to take that first, and then we will go to Angela. Thank you.
Ну, вот с какими проблемами я вот говорила, о том, что во многом дезагрегирование данных в наших публикациях, оно связано с развитием дезагрегации в статистических данных наших национальных статистических служб. Потому что мы просто собираем данные и их обобщаем. Если у них нет этих уровней дезагрегации, то, соответственно, в своих публикациях мы и не можем их отразить. Вот то, что я как раз приводила пример, что очень многие данные используют различные возрастные группы, или вот то, что, например, было в таблице, связанной с прививками, то есть разные виды прививок, разные дезагрегации, и мы, к сожалению, как бы не можем провести сопоставительный анализ, и в этом случае идем просто как картинка, или можно рассматривать по стране в динамике.
Thank you, Elena. Angela, would you like to come in there on the theme of the platform? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. At the moment, the indicators that are produced, disaggregated at territorial level, are showed only as visualization in the maps, and the maps are built inside the National Statistical Institute. What I showed more, dedicated to the register of places. Also this, the register of places is built for most of the work on maps, because we have to, for example, to consider the different, if you think about enumeration areas, the enumeration areas are built considering integrated information at geographic level and maps, and the same as per her building and dwellings piece of the register. They are built considering administrative data from cadastral, but also maps. But all this work is done inside the National Statistical Institute. So we work on this kind of maps. We have also a kind of geoportal, and in the future, when we will be able to use the register of place together with the population census to produce sustainable development statistical measure, we will disseminate also them considering the geoportal. I don't know if I answered your question, Mary, but...
Thank you, Angela. That's very informative. And Jonathan has some questions in the chat, so I'll just go to Jonathan now.
Thanks, Mary. So we have two questions from Statistics Poland, from Monika Gorzelak. And she thanks Angela for the presentation. And the first question is, do you use the same set of indicators for the national level and the subnational one? So by subnational, she means regions and provinces. And the second question is, in your integrated approach to monitor SDGs, there are only 8 goals for provinces. Could you explain why?
I do not understand well the second question, but I will try to answer the first. As I told you before, again, we are working at the moment we built our SDGs indicator without considering census data, because in Italy the census is a continuous one, but it is going to give results, statistical results, only in this year. So because we began traditional later than the other National Statistical Institute. So what I tried to explain before is that we are working on this register of place, and we worked with it also in these last months using population census data, and considering the integration of them. And because we will have at the end of this year and at the beginning of the next one, the final results of population census, from then we will be able to use this data to produce SDGs indicators at this very detailed territorial level. And this is important also because we can consider not only, at least for some indicators that could be produced considering census data, of course not all the indicators, but some indicators, we can faced with the challenge to build also indicators not only for administrative territorial level, but also for other kind of level. I do not really understand well the second question, so if you please, could you explain better? I will try to answer. Or could you repeat it? I mean.
Okay. Just we'll give the floor to Moldova.
Thank you.
I can also read out the question from Moldova, but maybe we can start with our colleague from Poland. Do you want to take the floor to explain your second question?
Obviously, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Once again, Angela, thank you very much for your informative presentation. What I meant by question number 2 refers to one of the slides in your presentation when you show integrated approach to monitoring SDGs and well-being. And there is a table with the number of SDG measures for regions, provinces, which is mapped with SDGs. And as far as provinces are concerned, there are only 15 indicators monitoring only 8 SDGs out of 17 SDGs. And that is why, and hence my question. I was wondering whether you chose these 8 SDGs as key SDGs for provinces, or perhaps you lack data for the remaining SDGs.
No, the point is that in Italy, the most important territorial level are regions and then municipalities. Provinces are less important, and it has been a period in which beginning from 2011 to 2022, that the province does not more exist as administrative level. They were cancelled and now they are again on. But as I showed you before, the sustainable strategy is really concentrated on regional level or municipality, big municipality level, big urban town. What they asked more is for other different territorial level. So this is one of the reasons. The ask is for region and municipalities, and then we try to concentrate our attention on this because, of course, we have also resource problems. And in consequences of this, we have the lack of data for province level, also because for more than 10 years, province does not anymore exist as administrative territorial level. Thank you so much for the question.
Thank you very much for your answer.
Thank you, Angela. We just have another question in the chat.
Okay, I'll just read it out. And the question is from Ms. Aurelia Spataru from the National Bureau of Statistics of the Republic of Moldova. The question is, what are the SDG indicators produced on the basis of census data and data from register of places, which result in those disaggregations and which cannot be produced from other data sources?
Some indicators where, of course, there are information related to population and the living condition and housing and so on can be used to produce some of the SDGs indicators. But of course, as I told you before, there are only some of them. We have one of the challenges is that to consider other survey and link and use the information from other survey, considering the register of places. What I mean is that one of the experiments that on which we have to work in the next year, for example, is that we have a survey dedicated to energy in the households. That is, of course, a very important thematic for sustainability and SDGs. And we'll try to link the results from this survey to the register of place to have more detailed information. But this is a challenge not only for a methodological reason, because there are, of course, but also for confidentiality reasons, because we have in Italy we have to face with questions dedicated to confidentiality to be sure that even if we always work considering code, only identification code and never single people, we have to analyze very well to face with the confidentiality problems. Thank you so much. And this could be also for other survey, but we have to work on this.
Have we any questions from the floor for Angela or Elena? We have Azerbaijan.
My question is to Ms. Angela. I see that you have these indicators on well-being and sustainability. I wanted to ask, the data collection for these indicators are only through surveys, or are you using other methods? Thank you.
We, as I told you before, to build this SDG system, we worked from 2016 inside the national statistical system with a lot of other statistical colleagues from other institutions. So we do not only have only data from survey or from administrative register, but we have also a work done by other institutions, like, for example, our environmental agency that produce a lot of indicators related, for example, to waste or other this kind of indicators. And they work using analysis and also georeference data for some of these indicators. The idea to use, for example, in a citizen data is again a challenge and maybe an opportunities for some of these energy indicators. But it is again a work in progress. So at the moment, the indicators are built considering survey and administrative data and geographical data, not only from us, from the National Statistical Institute, but also inside the National Statistical System from other institutions. Thank you.
I have a final question for Elena. And Elena, I would be interested to know if the survey you conducted of the National Statistical Offices, looking at their opinions on SDGs, if this is a once-off survey or if it's something you plan to do on a periodic basis to see if issues are changing regarding the SDGs. Thank you.
Провели два обследования, первое в 2016 году, чтобы понять, где находятся страны, и первоначально как они видят организацию мониторинга ЦУР, какие у них есть данные, есть ли у них пробелы в методологии, планируют ли, если нет методологии или нет данных по тем или иным показателям, планируют ли они собирать по этим показателям, то есть чтобы понять ситуацию на старте мониторинга показателей ЦУР, на старте повестки, что делается. А второе обследование мы провели, чтобы уже посмотреть, как развивается мониторинг в наших странах и как они видят его дальнейшее развитие и с какими проблемами они сталкиваются. И, собственно говоря, вот можно рассматривать как и третий вариант. Ну, опрос мы провели, не мониторинг. Какие показатели, мы запустили полный вот этот перечень, глобальный перечень показателей ЦУР, с тем, чтобы выяснить, какие есть данные. И на основе его мы пересмотрели наш перечень показателей ЦУР для региона СНГ. То есть если было на первом варианте 111 показателей, во втором 148. Но я просто хотела еще раз подчеркнуть, мы не вводим никакие показатели на уровне СНГ, какие-то новые, которых нет в перечне глобальных показателей ЦУР. Мы сразу приняли такое решение, что мы собираем мнение стран по перечню глобальных показателей, исходя их оценки актуальности и наличия данных, которые они собирают, и мы не формируем какой-то новый список, а просто на основе перечня глобальных показателей ЦУР формируем этот перечень для региона СНГ как наиболее актуальный, ну и с поправкой, что есть по ним, конечно, данные по этим показателям. Что-то еще? Я ответила на ваш вопрос.
А будет ли следующий обзор?
Обзор, вот мы пока не готовим какой-то новый обзор. В принципе, мы наш сборник, который публикуем на регулярной основе, используем тоже как инструмент для отслеживания развития мониторинга ЦУР в наших странах. Понятно, что в каждой стране публикация по показателям ЦУР, она более, наверное, богатая, более интересная, но мы сталкиваемся в своей практике при подготовке наших публикаций, что стран много, где-то введены одни национальные показатели, в других странах другие национальные показатели, разные уровни дизагрегации, разные дополнительные показатели. И мы как бы тогда в своем сборнике не сможем их свести. Это будет либо все время какие-то отдельные блоки по отдельным странам, либо это будут пустые таблицы. Мы первоначально делали, вот когда только начинали публикации по мониторингу ЦУР, мы сразу в таблицу включали все наши страны, и даже если по этим странам нет показателей, то есть идут тогда просто точки, чтобы и пользователи, и наши сами статистические службы видели, как идет мониторинг у других, и могли себя сопоставить с другими странами нашего содружества. Единственное, что уже при развитии деятельности по мониторингу ЦУР, когда у нас прошло уже несколько публикаций, по ряду показателей мы делаем блоки. Это в основном связано либо с показателями, данные по которым получают из обследований, поскольку эти обследования проводятся в разные годы, и содержание вопросов, оно тоже различно, то мы даем блоками. И вот в этом году мы еще уже стали делать еще блоки, потому что мы расширили вот этот перечень показателей для региона СНГ, и мы как бы для себя такое приняли решение, если уже хотя бы 3 страны могут представить данные по тому или иному показателю глобальному, то мы его включим в публикацию, но уже, конечно, чтобы совсем пустая таблица не выглядела, то есть таким небольшим блоком. И мы еще используем при подготовке этого сборника не только данные наших национальных статистических служб, но и данные международных организаций, их публикации по ЦУР, с тем, чтобы наш мониторинг, наш сборник был более интересным. И наряду с глобальными показателями ЦУР у нас в сборнике есть показатели, они помечены. Это дополнительные показатели в том случае, если либо в этой цели у нас мало каких-то показателей, которые могут охарактеризовать ход достижения цели, либо вот, мы считаем, что он тоже необходим для того, чтобы мониторинг был более таким глубоким, и что, например, вот мы добавили в качестве дополнительного показателя ожидаемая продолжительность жизни. Спасибо.
Thank you to Elena and Angela for two very informative presentations on data disaggregation and in highlighting the challenges faced in achieving our goal of leave no one behind for the SDGs. So with that, we will move to our third presentation, and after our third presentation, we will have a coffee break, and then the fourth presentation directly after the break, and then we will have questions and answers then at the end of the fourth presentation. So with that, I would like to introduce our third speaker, Siraj Mahmoodloo, and Siraj is with UNICEF. Siraj is the Child Rights Monitoring Manager at the Regional Office of UNICEF for Europe and Central Asia. His role is coordinating the work of UNICEF in the region on data and situation analysis on children and child rights monitoring. Siraj has held different positions in UNICEF in the areas of monitoring, evaluation, social policy and planning, and the most recent one being Deputy Representative in Turkmenistan. Siraj's academic background is in social policy. So, Siraj, I hand over to you to introduce your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mary. Good morning, everyone. Yes, another imposter, non-statistician in the room. Before I go and dwell on the data availability on SDG indicators and talk about indicators related to children, I wanted to start with a convention on the rights of the child that all the countries in this region have ratified. As you may know, there is a committee that reviews the implementation, monitors the implementation of the convention. And every 5 years or so, state parties, they submit reports. There is a process, rigorous process involving civil society, involving the different government ministries, culminating in a session that is held with a committee. The committee then goes ahead and issues recommendations to the state parties. The most recent I attended was for Ireland, Azerbaijan, upcoming for France, Turkey, Albania, I think a few other countries in the region. So what we have done, we have taken all the recent recommendations of the committee and tried to classify them by themes and sub-themes, but also by the type of bottleneck, by the type of issue that the recommendation is trying to remove. It could be related to an absence or presence of a certain legislation, could be management-related, coordination, data-related, supply, demand-related. And as you can see, sorry for the font, which is small probably, one of the most recurrent issues that the committee brings up with the state parties all the time has to do with data and evidence generation on children. Around 372 recommendations, these are most recent recommendations. And then if we want to see which countries receive this type of recommendations, almost all countries. UNICEF regional office covers 54 countries, so 52 out of 54 receive such a recommendation. Some of these recommendations are specific. They very much overlap with the focus of SDGs as well, particularly when we talk about disaggregation of data. So they talk about collecting data on children with disabilities. They talk about collecting data on street children, violence against children. Some of them are broad. They talk about establishment or development, further development of the data systems, holistic data systems that can comprehensively monitor the implementation of the convention. With this in mind, and to see how that holistic system could look like, and I will mention why I mention this to you now, we have put forward a child rights monitoring framework for the region linked to the CRC convention as well as to the SDG targets when it is relevant. There are 5 domains. As you see on the screen, there are subdomains. What is interesting is that for this domain and subdomains, we are doing a mapping of SDG indicators and other indicators, trying to understand what indicators are important to monitor, what measures exist out there to start with, that are important to monitor for the region, for the countries in the region. And our starting point here is, this is an example of violence against children and women subdomain. Our starting point here is SDG indicators. Whenever SDG indicators are there to measure that particular subdomain, that particular right, we start with that. But then there are other measures that go beyond SDG indicators. Why do I mention this? Because many aspects of the child rights may or may not have been captured in the SDG indicators. Just to give you one example, one of the most vulnerable groups of children who live in alternative care, they are not measured in the indicators of SDGs. They are not measured in household surveys, whether it is EU Silk, whether it is MIX that UNICEF supports. So I just wanted to highlight that before I move on and focus on SDG indicators related to children. There is no definitive list of SDG indicators related to children. UNICEF at the global level says 39, OECD says 3257, restricted list, expanded list. There can be different categories, right? There are some indicators which have implications for children, but they do not directly target children. One example is social spending, education, health, for example. There are composite indicators that contain child-specific measures, such as health tracers. I think it is indicator 3.8.1. There are some indicators that are population-based that require disaggregation or sub-indicator. For example, it could be an indicator on poverty, right? Poverty measures. Could be social protection coverage. And then indicators that specifically focus on children, that, for example, indicator on violence against children, I think 16.2.1. Or even a narrow age group, which is Early Childhood Development Index, children 2 to 5, or 2 to 4, if I remember correctly, is a recent one. But in this analysis, in this paper, in this presentation, we have taken into account only 16 indicators. UNICEF is a custodian or co-custodian for 18 indicators at the global level, and a partner for additional 10. Here, we have taken out 2, pro-poor public social spending, on which no country in the world seems to have data so far, and then female genital mutilation, which is not measured in the region, is not found relevant by many countries, although I do hear from state parties that it is something that needs to be kept on the radar. So 16 indicators. The ones in blue are the ones that belong to Tier 1. This is the most recent classification after the Statistical Commission this year. And the one in orange are Tier 2 indicators, just for your information, that we include in this analysis. Just to understand, and it is very provisional, right, as we discussed yesterday. One can look at this from different angles, and every indicator has its own story. Every country has their own story. So it is very difficult to generalize, but we just wanted to understand the general trend, to understand what is the situation in the region. And for that, we used the recently launched tool SDG Monitor by ETH Zurich, Swiss Federal Technological Institute. They are taking data from UNSD. There are some subtle differences, but the main focus they put is on the series, which is one level below the indicators of SDGs, to understand the availability of data. So these 16 indicators that I mentioned, that for which UNICEF is a custodian or co-custodian, has 32 series, could be sub-indicators in the database, SDG database. As we can see as a region, and by the way, here the region is a bit different from the UNICEF region. We are also adding the US, Canada, and Israel for the sake of the UNEC region. The data availability is at 52% for all goals that are represented by these 16 indicators and 32 series. Availability of data for some targets, some goals are much better than the others, especially when it comes to, for example, indicators on mortality, indicators on water management, for example. And I realized one reason for this, and I didn't know that, when we shared this with our headquarters colleagues, who are actually focal points for SDG indicators in New York, they said that some of the data availability for these indicators, such as mortality, such as water, such as some nutrition indicators, they are actually brought up by the fact that there is modeling involved. So it doesn't involve actual data points for some countries. It is just because if you have one data point or maybe two, then they are using modeling estimates in the SDG database. So I just wanted to highlight that. That is one of the factors to have in mind. But then we see that for some of the targets, such as malnutrition, for the targets related to violence against children, or the child labor, the data availability is very low. And here we are looking at least 1 year since 2015, at least 1 year, one series for that indicator to say that we have the data available. There are different measures can be used. When we look at 2 years since 2015, which is very important to understand the trends, because at the end of the day, why are we doing this? We are doing this to understand if we are on the right track, if we are making a change in the lives of people, in the lives of children. So when we look at least 2 years since 2015, the data availability for 56 countries goes to around 42%. The availability of data by targets and indicators is more or less the same as you saw before. That, by the way, dark blue signifies the data availability more than 75. Lighter blue between 50 and 75%. Dark red less than 25%, and light red is 25-50%. But then we see that for some of the indicators, and these are indicators related to violence against children, violence against women, could be child marriage, child labor. The indicator, the data availability is quite low, even going to 0% for some of the indicators when we try to establish trends to understand what's going on. I'm not going to go probably into, and you will not be able to see anyway, your countries from this. I hardly can see from here. But just to show that we see a different situation across the region. We have about 11 countries. These are countries mostly that have conducted a mix, but not only, that have data availability for more than 75% indicators. For some countries, it is reaching 90% when we look at least 1 year since 2015. And then we have 30 countries, this is light blue in the middle, which is around, I think, 30 countries that have data availability less than 75, more than 50, and the rest of the countries you see in red is less than 50%. At least 1 year, last 3 years, which may help give some hints about recent data availability. This is last 2022 to 22. We see that the situation changes. We do not have any country going beyond 75%. We have almost half of the region with more than 50% data availability, and the other half of the region less than 50% data availability. And the situation is more or less the same, although countries may change a little bit when we look at the data availability for at least 2 years since 2015. I'm not going to go into indicator detail and country detail. You may want to see the country situation and indicator situation later on, but these two tables actually try to extract the data from SDG Monitor about each indicator and for each country. Now, the main part of this is the discussion and recommendations. It's not recommendations actually to understand some of the reasons. I liked yesterday's discussion about whether some of these choices of indicators, are they strategic, are they statistical? Are they the decisions made by the broader society or by the whole of government, or the decisions are made by statisticians on which indicators are important? For example, just to give you one example, when we review the 100 indicators selected by Eurostat, I think through our consultative processes with you, which is very seen on children indicators and very seen on disaggregations for children. The question comes up to understand if it is something that is driven by what we measure, what we are able to measure, and not by what we ought to measure. So that is something that I don't have a response to, but that's the impression that we get. And then the question is how far countries are ready and able to go further and try to understand better the situation of children and do more child-focused sensitive data collection. And I will come to the issue of disaggregation in a second, which is not taken into account at all in this data availability analysis. Talking about prioritizing children, some of you may be aware that there was a guidance issued by the Conference of European Statisticians last year about the improvement of statistics on children. It focused mostly on 3 groups of children, children with disabilities, experiencing violence, and alternative care, because this also, by the way, overlapped with one of the policy priorities for EU now, EU Child Guarantee. But it also provided some recommendations, broad recommendations, on how to improve the data availability, comparable data availability on children overall. Some recommendations at the international level. The task force was headed by Canada Statistics. I was also part of that task force, and different countries participated in the task force. At the international level, there is a call to support development of more child-focused statistical infrastructure and statistical definitions. And for the national level, for you, there is a call by the guidance, by the conference, to elaborate national indicator plans and invest in the production and dissemination of data on children, designating a focal point for child and youth statistics, and making sure that countries include children in regular data collection, including through child-focused surveys. So that is one kind of guidance is already out there. There will be a follow-up meeting organized next year for the whole UNEC region by UNEC and UNICEF and other partners to understand how we can take this agenda forward. Some of it is SDGs, as I mentioned at the beginning. Some of it may go beyond SDGs because data and indicators relevant for children, as I said, may not be fully captured in the SDGs indicators. One of the examples of child-focused surveys that UNICEF has been supporting over years is a multiple indicator cluster survey, MIX. There have been 6 rounds so far, and we just last week we were in Belgrade, the regional workshop to prepare for Wave 7 with participating countries. So far, you see the list. This is not a definitive list. So with the new questionnaires, with the new modules, it used to be 30, but now it's a little bit 40 indicators, up to 40 SDG indicators. Can be measured through mixed questionnaires. Around 80 SDG indicators can be measured through household surveys. This is a tentative kind of estimation. And half of it can now be measured in mix. Not that it should be measured, right? Because you cannot have a questionnaire so long that can cover all of these indicators, but potentially it can cover up to 40. And now coming to the issue of vulnerability, talking about vulnerable groups, vulnerable children. Some of these countries with an asterisk in this table have also been conducting, in addition to the national sample, a separate sample on children in Roma settlements. And that the plan is to conduct this, to continue doing this, to understand better the spread of the progress in the country. We are trying to put together an inequity dashboard that brings out, captures the disaggregations to start with in the mixed surveys, but we can then hopefully expand to other surveys, because even SDG database and our own databases in UNICEF do not allow to include all other potential disaggregations that are already out there. We are not able to see them, such as subnational disaggregation, which is most important for policymaking. So this, the work is in progress. You see, for example, the countries. This is SDG indicator 4.2.2. It is about whether children are attending pre-primary education 1 year before the primary school. So you see the spread of the progress for each country, for some of the subgroups, for some of the potential markers of the potential disaggregations. Some of them are ethnic minorities, some of them are children with functional difficulty, subnational level, of course, male, female, urban, rural, quintiles, richest, poorest. In this case, for example, in the case of Georgia, we see that there is a big difference between the group furthest left behind and the national average. In this case, in North Macedonia, we see that there is a big divide between rural and urban, and even a bigger divide if we are taking into account the children in the richest quintile, which is further advanced than the national average. It is very important, and we are not really, I think Carolina mentioned it yesterday, it brings a different dynamics. It has different cost implications. It has many different implications for our work. But then if we want to make the 2030 agenda happen, it is important to understand who is benefiting from the progress, who is left behind in the national averages. And I will give you one more example with policy relevance from this dashboard, and then I will stop there. This is a case of Serbia. Serbia has been conducting all rounds of mix so far, the latest being in 2019. And again, this is the same SDG indicator, 4.2.2, pre-primary education. We see that in 2014, the national average, which is at the very bottom of this graph, was already quite high. But then what we see in 2019, that it further went up, which is good progress. But what is more probably welcoming and commending here is the progress that was made for the children in the Roma settlements, as you see with the second arrow. And that's what we want, right? We want the disadvantaged groups to progress more, to be able to reach the national average at some point. And probably this was done after the introduction of mandatory PPP in Serbia, which I am aware of. And then this is a very good progress that the policymakers in Serbia can be proud of. And then forward-looking, what now needs to be thought about, included in the national planning instruments, target setting, is how to further narrow the gap between the remaining groups, vulnerable groups, and the national average. In this case, the furthest behind is the children in the poorest households and national average, as well as the remaining gap between the Roma settlements and the national average. Thank you for your attention. I will stop here. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you, Siraj, for sharing this very detailed presentation on data disaggregation and also on highlighting the vulnerable groups and looking at leave no one behind in terms of achieving Agenda 2030 and also the evidence-based policy changes which have shown real impact. Just now we will take the coffee break, and if everybody could be back here please at 11:15 please for our fourth speaker, and then we will have questions and answers after the fourth presentation. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. So if you could all take your seats, please, and we will go to our fourth and final presentation of this session. And this final presentation in session 4 is by Galar Fatali. And Galar works with the UN Resident Coordinator Office in Azerbaijan. She works in data management, results monitoring, and is the reporting officer at the UN Resident Coordinator's Office in Azerbaijan. Galar is leading the monitoring and reporting processes for the UN country team in Azerbaijan since 2017, and since 2020, she has stepped forward to help the UN country team to provide better support to monitor the SDGs. And by working with the State Statistical Committee, especially around problems of SDG data availability and data disaggregation. Galar will be sharing Azerbaijan's case on how RCO and UNCT in Azerbaijan join efforts to advance SDGs in the country. So, Galar, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, colleagues. I hope you had a good break. I also hope you had a chance to try some of the sweets, baklava from Azerbaijan. If not, it is still there in the entrance, so please take your time to try those. I'm working for the Resident Coordinator's Office in Azerbaijan, and it is my first time attending this expert meeting together with my colleagues from other Resident Coordinator's Office in this line. And just to give a little bit background, the data positions at the RCO offices, they were introduced together with the SDG reform in 2019, and starting from that year, we, the data officers at the coordination offices, we are not dealing only for monitoring and reporting for UN results, but also working with the national statistical offices and trying to see how we can bring together the efforts of different UN entities to further the SDG data landscape in the countries that we are working for. So I'll be sharing the case of Azerbaijan and how, as a resident coordinator office, we are working with the State Statistical Committee. But before that, I just want to give a little bit overview how Azerbaijan is doing. I mean, I wish my colleague from Statistics Office would do this presentation today, but unfortunately, he's not here today. I just brought 2 data points from World Bank from 2019 and also from UNESCO SDG Gateway from 2022. And when we are looking at these data points, we can see that Azerbaijan is doing good in terms of reporting on SDG data. So in 2019, it was around 68.1 when we were looking at the statistical performance index by the World Bank. When we are looking at the data availability in 2022, last year, we can see that there is good progress against the SDG indicators. I also want to mention, I think in many of your countries, yes, you have the dashboards where you present the reporting against the SDG indicators. So in Azerbaijan, we also have this national statistical SDG portal for SDG by National Statistical Office, where they report against the indicators. And also on an annual basis, they are publishing the reports on their websites on SDGs. When we are looking at the data availability and how Azerbaijan is doing on disaggregation, so we can see that from 2021 to 2023, there is a progress. I also want to mention that Azerbaijan has nationalized the indicators. And when I mean nationalized, it is not that they have changed all the indicators and they introduced new indicators. No, but it's more like prioritizing the indicators that is suitable for the context of Azerbaijan. So 119 indicators have been prioritized, but the government, the National Statistical Office, they are also reporting against the global indicators. And we can also see how they are doing on disaggregation from 2021 to 2023. So we can see that the number of indicators that are fully disaggregated against the requirements are increasing. So in 2023, it is 38 indicators that are fully disaggregated, and we can see the data points for partially disaggregated indicators and the indicators that are in progress. So what was the departure point for us as a UN office in Azerbaijan? Perhaps many of you are familiar with the UN, the cooperation framework between the UN and the and your government, and to develop this document every 5 years. We are bringing together the expertise of different UN entities and developing the common country analysis. So in this document, what we have seen, of course, when we were looking at the SDG data gaps, we have realized that there's a space for improvement, even though the National Statistical Office and the government, they are trying to monitor and report on SDGs, but there is still a space for UN to intervene. And also the voluntary national reviews, Azerbaijan has submitted third VNR in 2021, and in their last VNRs, they have also recognized that there is a need for further improvement, specifically on disaggregation. And departing from this point, the UN Resident Coordinator Office, together with the State Statistics Committee, we have established a joint task force on SDGs to look closely on what are the issues we can work together. And the new cooperation framework between the government of Azerbaijan and the United Nations, it includes a standalone outcome on SDG data, which I think is not the case for many countries, but perhaps can be considered. But of course, data is also cross-cutting issue across all other outcome areas in the cooperation framework. There were several actions in the joint work plan together with the Statistics Office, but we chose to focus on data disaggregation and brought together the expertise from different UN entities, including from UNICEF, from statistical offices of UK, Kyrgyz Republic, and others to share their practices and case studies on the methods they are using for data disaggregation. So we focused on the importance of data disaggregation for SDGs, how we need to disaggregate data to leave no one behind, and different thematic approaches to data disaggregation. And as a result of this workshop, of course, usually when people attend the workshops and then they forget it maybe the next day, but to make it stay in their memories, we have produced the guidebook on data disaggregation. You can maybe take a sample from the table and look what is included. So we have focused on two methodologies on data disaggregation. One, relatively maybe easier for the statistical office to use the existing data sources like the household survey or the census data, and to look how they can further disaggregate the data. And the introduced methodology was the small area estimation. But at the same time, we also wanted to introduce how other methods, like alternative methods, like mobile data, can be used to further disaggregate the SDG data. And the classification for big data was also introduced in the guidebook. Following this, together with the Statistics Office, we had information sessions, how they can utilize this methodology, especially the small area estimation methodology, and then the workshop on how we can partner with the civil society organizations, and my colleague from North Macedonia is also here today, and also from UNDP Moldova. The practices shared how they are partnering with academia and non-governmental organizations. I think one of the maybe big asset of UN for the statistical office was also to translate the SDG metadata into Azerbaijani and also link them with several custodian agencies to explain the methodology and how they can better report on SDGs. The next step was SDG index. I remember from our conversation from yesterday that the indexes can be tricky sometimes, but in our case, indeed, the SDG index produced by the SDCN was, I would say, another entry point for us to further the work on SDGs, because we could see that in the report, there were discrepancies between the data points from global databases and also the national database, several indicators that are missing data, and also indicators that there is regress and there is need for improvement. So we had this consultation with together with the statistical office, but also engaging other government entities who are providing data on SDGs. The next step was to bring this discussion at the policy level. So we chose two dimensions. So one of them was on green transformation. We have selected 38 green growth indicators and brought together the high-level government officials to look at the progress against these indicators and then see what can be done at the country level to improve the situation. And the next SDG policy dialogue, it is scheduled for June. And for this one, we'll be focusing on inclusive economic growth and social inclusion indicators. I have covered what, as the UN Resident Coordinator's Office, we are doing together with the government, specifically with the National Statistical Office. But I don't want to overlook what other UN entities are also doing in the country. Because as a coordination office, we have very limited budget for real data collection. So what we do basically is to bring together the different expertise of UN entities or other partners and look at the ways how we can build synergies. But I also want to mention some of the interventions by the UN entities. My colleague from UNICEF mentioned MIX, Multiple Indicator Cluster Survey, that is it kicked off last year, but the data collection will be this year. Also, different reports and analysis looking at the different groups. For example, the elderly people. There was a report published by UNFPA on Active Aging Index. Also looking at the loneliness and social inclusion of elderly people in this region, specifically looking at the gender inequality in agriculture. And also every year with UNFPA support, the Statistical Office, they are publishing Women and Men Statistical Yearbook for Azerbaijan. Of course, there are challenges specifically for the coordination office, but also I think for the National Statistical Office as well. One of them is for us to find the common pain points, because usually we can come up, let's say as UN, we can come up with interventions and a lot of new ideas, but it is challenging to get the buy-in from the government, especially when we are talking about the usage of alternative data sources. And then the question comes in the reliability of the data and the quality of the data. So it is very important to find the pain points for us between the UN and the government, and try to work on these issues. And also acknowledging partners' achievements. For us, as I said, one of the entry points was the SDG index, where the government has progressed and also picked up on this progress and furthered the consultations on SDG data. Yes, I think I will end my presentation here, and if any questions, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Galar, and again, an excellent presentation on emphasizing the importance of data disaggregation in terms of highlighting the issues with the vulnerable groups and in leaving no one behind. And I would like to pose a question or more observation to both Galar and Siraj. And you both emphasize the importance of evidence-based policy and working with the policymakers. So do you have advice for the rest of us working on SDGs in terms of getting the policymakers to engage with the data and making sure that that data carries through into the decisions they make? Thank you.
Should I start or Serge?
Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah, I think as I mentioned in my last slide, it is the pain points where the government really sees the issues and they want to build upon on this. For example, the first policy dialogue in Azerbaijan, we focused on green transformation, because perhaps many of you know that Azerbaijan is the main exporter of oil and gas, and from time to time, we are hit by the global economic crisis, as the one of 2016, for example. And in 2016, the government started reforms, how they can switch, diversify the economy and become the country not depending on oil and gas revenues, but also leveraging the other resources we have. So I think, yes, we know that is the interest of the government, and this is the green growth and green transformation is one of the areas that the government is interested. So that's why we focus the first SDG policy dialogue on green transformation and using the indicators of green growth indicators. So yeah, major pain points, I would say.
Thank you, Galar. Siraj, have you words of wisdom for us?
Not necessarily words of wisdom, but two things come to my mind. One, when I was working in Turkmenistan, I could see how the SDG processes, the development of indicators, the discussion about what indicators to adopt, why, it really helped the line ministries to think about measurement, some of them for the first time. So they come and say, what is this indicator? What are we supposed to do? And for me, that provided a very good opportunity for the statistical office to position itself further position itself as an authority for which then the line ministries can come to you in the future. So one thing I saw in action is how the SDG processes, the discussion about indicators and measurements can boost the debates about the importance of measurement and inclusion, integration in the policy making. That's one point. And secondly, there are processes going on, and some of you are already doing it. So my just probably a plea would be to be proactive. I know NSOs have a lot of work, very few staff, very few budget, but to be proactive, to reach out more, to explain more, and not assume that policymakers would know what is the possibilities there in terms of data availability and disaggregation. One example is the EU Child Guarantee in EU countries, right? The Child Guarantee was launched, but now more and more countries realize that they do not have enough data, enough disaggregation to be able to measure how the countries are going to progress how to make progress on the situation of children. So this is an opportunity for EU countries and also in EU countries to join these processes, if not already done. I know in some countries, NSOs are very active and very participatory in these processes. So to use the policy-making processes wisely and to make sure that we share the knowledge and information that we have and others don't, that can be very useful for the country eventually.
Thank you. And we have a question from FAO. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I think it's a very important innovation, the fact that resident coordinators are attending this meeting, and it's a very welcome innovation, I would say. FAO has organized together with UNSD a series of webinars for UN resident coordinators and especially the data officers in each country office, because each country office has recruited a data officer to support this data work, which is quite important at country level. So this is my first consideration. And the idea was exactly to try to make sure that in the document that is agreed with the government, the UNSDCF, between the UN agencies and the government, there is space for a program for supporting the production and use of SDG indicators, because this is an area that is most of the time forgotten and not included in the national programming. So it's very important that you have included this. On data disaggregation, I was also very pleased to see that you have highlighted the challenges that are faced by every country and international organization in producing disaggregated data using the usual data sources, both census and surveys and administrative data, because there is a limit to what can be disaggregated using surveys, and administrative data have other problems that normally cannot be solved very easily. So the tendency at the international level is to invest more and more in model-based estimates, which take into account and combine different data sources, both census and surveys, administrative data, and also new data sources, alternative data sources that can be geospatial data or other type of information. And through the combination of these different data sources in a model-based approach, small area estimation or statistical predictor models, you can come up with disaggregation that otherwise we would not be able to produce with the normal statistics. There is a lot of work done at international level. So I think that there is no need to repeat this work at national level, to produce guidelines, for example, at national level. And this work has been presented recently even at the UN Statistical Commission. Both the IAG SDG had a group on data disaggregation, and the Intersecretariat Working Group on Household Surveys has a specific group on data disaggregation, and have produced a number of guidelines using different methodologies for different type of indicators, with the collaboration of international agencies, custodian agencies, including FAO. FAO has produced, for example, 2 or 3 documents that are most relevant for the indicators related to food and agriculture, which have specific problems that have to be addressed in this case. So my invitation is to use as much as possible these documents and the let's say the expertise that has been developed in the custodian agencies producing this data, piloting these methods in some countries, but of course it's not possible to do it in every country, and especially for us as FAO, we need first a request from the country in order to intervene at country level. So this is an invitation to involve custodian agencies and these groups that have been established within the under the framework of the UN Statistical Commission to let's say take advantage of the expertise and experience that has been developed in this area. Concerning the SDG index, I'm sorry, but I have still to say that I don't agree with this method, especially not only because it is an index, but because it is done by SDSN, which is in a way an NGO that has been quite sidelined by the IAG SDG, and the list of indicators that they use is not consistent with the global indicator framework that has been approved by the UN Statistical Commission and even by the UN General Assembly at the highest political level in 2017. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Have we any other questions? Yes. Sorry, what country?
Thank you. Yes, thank you. I've had a similar comment because we have shied away from showing trend on the SDG itself. In Serbia, we produced backwards 4 or 5 years annual SDG reports, but they show trends only in indicators. So I would like, to get an information, how do we approach the methodology where we can show a trend per the goal itself, which would be more useful for the public in terms of communications, because showing year by year just trends and indicators, it's not really useful in terms of selling it to the public. That's one question. The other is for Siraj. I can't emphasize enough the importance of mix. It produces, I think, through mix we get about 30% of indicators that we have collected so far, and about 20% for the cooperation framework. So, but it, cycle after cycle, it gets very hard to get the fundraising for the mix. So the question is, for the countries that do not use mix, in your experience, which are the data sources, since some SDGs are closely tied to mix indicators, which are the sources that are most commonly used as proxies or otherwise to cover them? Thank you.
Thank you, Serbia. Siraj, would you like to take that question?
Thanks a lot for the question. Yeah, that is one of the problems we face, right? Some of the countries are finding shortcuts. We even see situations when the country reports percentage of population or refer to 16 above, let's say percentage of population. So how to go one step further? Some countries are conducting child-focused surveys specific, but it is not kind of institutionalized. In the EU area, we have, as colleagues know, that every 3 years, there is a separate module on children. But again, the number of indicators, SDG indicators it measures is very limited. It is only those SDG indicators that Eurostat has accepted. It's about at risk of poverty, social exclusion, but not, for example, other indicators such as overweight. So I do believe, and I increasingly believe that countries should think about actually child-focused either surveys or make sure that the regular data collection has this element in mind. Another reason why this is important is that in most of our countries, if not all, fertility rates are falling. So if we talk about a household survey, it is becoming increasingly difficult through the normal sampling to find enough children to segregate data by. In mix, we have started, and in Serbia, I think it was one of the countries that started it, is oversampling of households with children to make sure that there is enough samples so that we can do the disaggregation. but there should be much more done in terms of institutionalization of this type of surveys. That said, some countries are also taking modules from mix and including in their surveys. Like Greece, my colleague left, they took the child functioning, child disability module from mix and included it into the HES, health interview survey, to understand the child functioning situation in Greece from that angle. But it is not systematic, it is not sustainable, I agree. Something more needs to be done.
Have we any more questions from the floor? A bunch.
Is it okay if I don't ask a question and reply to the comments? About the summary measurements, we had this topic in the last expert meeting, if you remember. So I think it would be a very good source to reconsider that session and the presentations. We had even brave colleagues from Spain who tried to produce a composite index for SDGs and take lots of friendly fire from other statisticians, if you remember. And that's one approach. And also, you're probably familiar with the Eurostat's summary measures on goal level. You can use that as well. And I always thought that this SDG indicator framework, this dashboard approach, would somehow conclude this discussion on summary measures, composite indices, etc. But it will always be with us to the end, I assume, and we will somehow always discuss and always try to use these tools. For example, in the Future for Economics conference that I mentioned to Bo, his boss Gerard Eddings also mentioned the possible use of composite indices, especially for communication purposes, to better get into the detailed indicator set, because it's not very easy to communicate a whole indicator set. That was the conclusion of the last year's session as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Avanch. Have we any more questions from the floor before we move to the chat? I would like to invite our Polish colleague in Poland here to, could you, sorry, Joanna, could you please call out your question? Thank you. Sorry, we appear to have some technical difficulties. So Jonathan will read out the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. So the question comes from Ms. Joanna Wojcik. I'm hoping that I've pronounced your name correctly, from Statistics Poland. And it's a comment on Mr. Siraj's presentation. So thank you very much, Siraj, for your very interesting presentation. As you mentioned, some indicators are inadequate for some countries. For example, for Poland, I can point out birth registration or child labor. In Poland, both issues are regulated by law. Birth registration is 100% and child labor is prohibited by law. Therefore, there is no need to monitor these areas. Nevertheless, your list inspires us to look again at this list of indicators and try to identify opportunities to monitor the situation of children in areas that are perhaps undercovered. Therefore, once again, thank you very much, Siraj, for inspiring us to continue working. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. If we have no more questions, we will, sorry, Siraj, sorry.
No, absolutely. Thanks a lot for this comment. It goes back to the issue of whether these decisions are statistical or strategic. Have we really considered the definition? Do we fully know the situation for different groups? Birth registration, I agree, it is more or less, more than 99% for almost all countries in the region. There are delays in some countries for some groups, especially when it is the registration of children under 1. But again, these things you can only capture probably in census rather than in a survey to start with, or administrative data. If you have a very good register, you don't need to worry. Child labor, it requires probably review of the definition, right? There's a definition that's put forward by ILO, and UNICEF is a co-custodian with ILO. When we talk about child labor, we only think about hazardous working conditions or economic labor. But there is another element in the definition, which is about household chores. And if it goes beyond a certain number of hours, for example, child is engaged in, it also falls in the definition of child labor. So yeah, I would just encourage to really review whether or not we have taken into account all the elements of the indicator definitions, and then make sure that how we thought about leaving no one behind. Are there particular groups that may be vulnerable for this particular indicator? And I'm not saying again that you have to suddenly count and measure all the indicators. That choice should be taken into account, taking into account the cost and many other factors. But it would be good to have this informed decision that, am I leaving any certain groups out? When I think that national average is 99%, while for some groups it could be 80%, 75%. And secondly, have I really reviewed all the elements of the indicators that SDGs are putting forward? Thank you.
Thank you, Suraj. Have we any more questions? Okay, with that, we will conclude this session. So I would just like to emphasize again the common themes from yesterday's sessions. The importance of data disaggregation in terms of leaving no one behind has been excellently presented by our four speakers in this morning's session. So I would like to thank them and thank them for sharing their examples in what worked well, but also on lifting the carpet on where the problems are and the challenges that we all face and are common to us all. And we see that the vulnerable groups can only be targeted by the policymakers if we have the data for the policymakers. And the speakers emphasized the importance of this, of presenting the data to the policymakers, but also in monitoring how the policies affected the groups, and again, having the evidence there to prove the policies work. Like yesterday's session, there was an important focus on partnership. And again, with the theme of the SDGs, we can't achieve the SDG goals or Agenda 2030 unless we work together, and working with the experts and both the statisticians and the policymakers in achieving the goal of leaving no one behind. And again, yesterday, there was a strong emphasis on capacity building, again with partners, and it showed that sharing expertise and resources is just as valuable as funding. So we need to focus on all aspects of how we work with our partners. And also, again, we have to keep emphasizing the importance of data as statisticians, because data is the hard evidence. And if we want to leave no one behind and achieve Agenda 2030, we as statisticians have an obligation to emphasize again and again to the policymakers and keep reminding them that we have the information that they require, both to implement policy, but also to monitor how effective the policy is. And again, our speakers with their presentations emphasized the importance of getting buy-in in the political sphere and keeping a strong focus on our targets. So thank you very much for listening, and I will conclude session 4 now.